Hey, what is up YouTube? This is Merman Master coming at you guys from the Team Time Riders Yu-Gi-Oh! Channel, and in today's deck profile, we are going to be taking a look at the Gravekeeper'S Chieftain. Now, this guy was a kind of one-off villain that appeared over a 2-episode span in the beginning of GX and was Jaden's first duel experience in the quote-unquote spirit world, which he would later go into in Season 3. The Gravekeeper's Chief was a duelist that he had to defeat to obtain one half of the pendant that he later found out that Atticus/Night Shroud had the other half of it. It was a duel where his friends were like locked up in the coffins. I think it was Alexis, Cyrus, Chumley, and Banner were locked up in there, and if he lost the duel, he would bear the grave risk of defeating them. So, as you guys know, the Gravekeeper's Chief played, of course, a Gravekeeper's deck, but he used a lot of old cards. And what I wanted to do with this deck profile was to provide a style of play similar to how he did, without using any of the new cards to have a new strategy. So, like, none of the fusion monster, none of the, other extra deck kind of shenanigans that Gravekeepers can usually pull off. And I wanted to keep it as old as possible, using the new cards only to increase the style and efficiency of some of the old stuff. So guys, I'll explain a little bit more about the deck profile, but we're going to get started for now. Starting out right here, we have not one, but 2 copies of the Gravekeeper's Chieftain. Now, he was the original Gravekeeper monster, but I don't know how heavily he was run in the original version of the deck. Basically, his effect is that when he is tribute summoned, you can only have 1 copy of him on the board, and then what he does is that none of the monsters or anything in that in your graveyard are affected by Necro Valley. So that's a pretty good start effect, but he also has the ability to special summon 1 monster that includes Gravekeeper in its card name from your graveyard, which is pretty cool, because if you tribute a monster, you can instantly get that advantage back by bringing the monster you tributed back to the board. So I'm going to push him up here. Next card we've got are 2 copies of Gravekeeper's Assailant. This was the woman named Yasmin in the show, but Gravekeeper's Assailant is great because it switches the attack power of, switches your opponent's monster's battle position whenever it attacks them. So a very powerful kind of effect, especially if your opponent is kind of on the defensive. Next, we have a Gravekeeper's Chief Special, the 2 copies of the Gravekeeper's Curse. Gravekeeper's Curse, when he comes to the field, normal special, flip summon, however he's summoned to the board, inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent. And some of the cards in here that I have, especially some of the new stuff, are designed to kind of recycle and use Gravekeeper's Curse as much as possible, just for a lark and to try and have some fun at the expense of your opponent. But just think it's a really quirky old card, and it's fun to get off that effect damage, no matter how minuscule it may be in the grand scheme of things. Next cards we have in here are only 2 copies of Gravekeeper's Commandant. This is just to search your Necro Valley out of the deck. Necro Valley, of course, is a wonderful card, but I had the Commandants in here at 3. Just was not liking the ratios. I felt like I saw Necro Valley way too often with how much we search it. So cutting down the Commandant number to 2 was perfect for me. It also works out because Commandant can boost to 2100 under this effect. Though unfortunately, I don't know why Konami decided, with all the rest of the Gravekeepers being dark, to make Commandant Earth. Still though, Necro Valley is a main key play in this deck, so Commandant is necessary. We then have 2 copies of Gravekeeper's Recruiter, for obvious reason. Gets whatever Gravekeeper, except for Chief, that you want out of your deck, so it can bring it right to your hand when it's sent to the graveyard. So kind of like a Sangan or Witch of the Black Forest for Gravekeepers, which is quite nice in a deck like this. Next card we have in here is one of those very new cards, and that is 2 copies of Gravekeeper Hedman. Now, remember how I said that there are cards that you can use to special summon Gravekeepers back from your graveyard. I don't have the fusion card or some of the other ones, but I felt like Gravekeeper Hedman looks the most Egyptian of the older cards, and so I kind of wanted to have him in here because you can use him to repeatedly revive Curse from your graveyard and gain extra damage on your opponent, which is a kind of funny and interesting fun play. Do note, guys, I'm also not running Gravekeeper's Spy because it is way too slow, and Gravekeeper's Chief himself did not run the card. So While it would be cool to have champion pack spies in this deck, unfortunately, I just felt like it was not in the cards. No pun intended. We've next got one copy of Gravekeeper's Spear Soldier. Any more than that makes the deck a little bit more inconsistent than it should be. But having Spear Soldier and his piercing damage is kind of cool in a way to help get the Gravekeeper strategy going. We then have one copy of Gravekeeper's Guard, who is like a snowman eater. He just bounces whatever flips him face up into the hand, and really nice flip effect, and was really good way back in the day. Then we finally have a couple more cards in here. One copy of the Gravekeeper's Watcher, one of the very first cards I ever pulled way back in the day, so I love having this in here. And he's kind of a funny card because you can use him to negate dangers. If your opponent activates an effect that would discard cards from their hand to the graveyard, you can activate this effect to negate that effect, which is pretty cool and can come up in rando situations. But most of the time, he's kind of just in here for flavor. So you want to make sure that, you know, for different flavor cards that you have in here, that the deck is consistent as possible without those cards. And of course, we're focusing on a more attack-centric Gravekeeper's deck rather than a stun/defensive version of the deck, to really kind of figure out, put the best foot forward for the character, if you will, and to really show kind of how he used to play. We then have one copy of Gravekeeper's Cannon Soldier, or Cannon Holder, as we should say, and basically allows you to tribute any Gravekeeper monster except for Gravekeeper's Cannon Holder to inflict 700 points of damage to your opponent. So maybe one of these days this card will be broken, but for now, good card to have in the deck. The final cards are probably some that you guys have not seen before. This is two copies of the Charm of Shabti. You can discard this card from your hand to the graveyard during the battle phase, and any damage that is inflicted to your life points or to a Gravekeeper's monster automatically becomes 0. So basically, it's like a Wabaku hand trap for your Gravekeepers, which is crazy cool, and nobody ever sees this coming. So, you know, you keep them on the field, and you don't take any damage, which is pretty cool. And when you drop this on people, it's certainly a surprise. And I know a lot of people don't like playing against Gravekeeper's deck, but let me tell you guys, this is the funnest version of Gravekeepers that you will find, and the version that people will want to come back and play again and again, which is a rare thing for Gravekeepers. Now, of course, this would not be a Gravekeeper's deck without the one and only Necrovalley. Necrovalley is a spell card that is so good that it is still relevant years later because it basically locks out the graveyard, preventing anything from leaving it, whether it's to the field, getting banished, or whatever. Nothing can leave the graveyard, and nothing can target it in there, which is super good. And then, of course, the extra added effect of being able to boost your Gravekeeper's monsters' attack powers all by 500 points, brings your chief up to 24, and brings most of your monsters up to 2,000. So just really helps to get a little bit more damage on the board, especially when your opponent is locked out of their graveyard. They're more playing at your pace, and so you have a lot of plays. There's tons of ways to search Necrovalley in the deck, so you don't really have to worry too much about it. Next is three copies of Necrovalley Throne. Provides an extra. This is basically a double summon and a rota for Gravekeepers, all in one card. You can only activate one of those effects at a time and only once that turn, but still an amazing card that you have to have in the deck. We then have two copies of Royal Tribute, which is key. This used to be at 1 for the longest time. It's gone up to 3, but 2 for me is the perfect number because it also discards from your hand as well. Just basically is a you don't even have to control a Gravekeeper's monster, but if you control Necrovalley, both players discard any monsters in their hands, which is amazing because if you have Necrovalley out, your opponent discards the stuff from their hands to the graveyard, and then if their effects would banish to activate, the Necrovalley is just going to negate that. So very cool. And ironically, the funny thing is that if you're in a Gravekeeper's mirror match, your Gravekeeper's Watcher can actually negate Royal Tribute, which is pretty cool. Gravekeeper's Stell, this is like salvage for Gravekeepers, takes any 2 Gravekeepers and must target 2, and brings them back to your hand. 2 copies of MST, typical, you know, very good card to have in here, and, you know, I felt running like Twin Twisters or Cyclone or whatever would be a little bit too much to ask for. So we just have the MST in here. And then finally, a single copy of Terraforming, because unfortunately, guys, Terraforming's only at 1. That's it for these spells. Moving on to the traps. 2 copies of Rite of Spirit, a nice revival card for your Gravekeeper monsters as well, and unaffected by Necro Valley, so really, really good. We then have 2 copies of your Imperial Tombs of the Necro Valley. Nice negation when you control a Gravekeeper's monster and Necro Valley. Really nice blanket negation effect. We then have 2 copies of Necro Valley Temple, which lowers your opponent's monster's attack by 500 and can search a Necro Valley and special it, or activate a Necro Valley from your hand or grave, and if it's destroyed, can activate one directly from your deck. So it allows you to reuse old Necro Valleys. And as I mentioned, this is one of the many cards in here that consistently gets Necro Valley into your field zone, so you don't really have to worry too much about it after that. 2 copies of Mirror Force for obvious reasons, and for a little bit more of a flavor. Of course, if you're running a more competitive version of Gravekeeper's deck, you're obviously not running this card, but this is nice and casual, so keeping it pretty GX era-ish. And then finally, 1 Metaverse to close things out. And that's going to do it for our Gravekeeper's Chief deck profile. Really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to rate, comment, subscribe to the Team Time Riders YouTube channel. And this has been the Merman Master signing out. Catch you guys next time. Peace.